A lot of people are frustrated with the response of Los Angeles to the fires. My guest today is Mike Gatto, who's a former California Assembly member in Los Angeles, and he's helped 3 mayors in LA. He knows the ins and outs of politics of LA. He's here to tell us what's the sentiment on the ground in the response to the fires and how LA could politically change.
And more importantly, people need to tell their stories. Our leaders need to hear the emotion in people's voices. They need to understand what this meant to people. I know it sounds crazy. People are like, oh, why would that big, powerful elected official talk with me? Well, the answer is because they work for you. That's how it works.
How does these fires make LA look like internationally?
If our enemies around the world know that we cannot have an effective wildfire response in the biggest state in the union, that is a major, major security risk going forward.
I'm Siamak Karami. Welcome to California Insider. Mike, it's great to have you on. Welcome back.
It is so great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Mike, you have been involved with the state legislature for many years, for 7 years, and you have also been involved with the mayor's office in Los Angeles, so you kind of know the city and the state. Can you tell us what's your assessment of what happened with the fires?
Well, first, it's important to note that we're not here to blame anybody, but we're here to get answers. The whole region is hurting. Everybody knows somebody who is affected, and people are just desperate for answers. They want to know what happened so that we can learn from it as a people, so that we can make sure that this type of severe fires will never happen again. Fires are a fact of life. Wildfires have been burning in this basin since before there were cars, since before there was modern industry and everything like that. When the first Spanish ship sailed into San Pedro, there was a wildfire burning, and it's noted in their records. But this type of severe wildfires, where we lost so much and where things happened in such a bad fashion, that's the type of thing that we have to try to avoid. You know, it's important to note that nuance has been lacking. You know, so many people debating this will say it's this or say it's that. But I think it's fair to say that every different thing that people have identified contributed to the fires in some degree. But the problem is when you drill down to it, you have to conclude that there is a percentage of the reason why the fires are so severe that is attributed to incompetence.
Can you explain to us what does that look like for us that may not know inside the government how it works?
Well, imagine for a minute that you and I are going on a fishing trip to the Arctic Circle. A lot of people do this, right? We're going to fly up to Alaska and we're going to one of those dream fishing trips. And we're going a year from now. Okay, so then the day comes and we fly up there and we're driving to our little fishing hole and you see that I rented a Mazda Miata where the time comes for us to cross a river and the river is flooded and we can't get across. And you say to me, Mike, how come you didn't get an all-terrain vehicle? And I say, well, the river's never been this big before because the climate is changing. Now it's much hotter in Alaska, so more stuff is melting. This river's never been this big. The climate's changing. You say, well, Mike, we knew the climate was changing. How come you didn't rent an all-terrain vehicle? And then we get to our fishing hole, and you see that I didn't pack jackets for us. And I say, well, the winds are blowing. I'm sorry it's so cold, but the winds are blowing. You say, well, didn't you pack a jacket for us? My point is simple. Anything that is predictable is preventable. If you knew that things were going to be bad, the question becomes, what did you do to try to prevent this, or at least mitigate it? And I think when we tell the story of the Los Angeles fires, we will conclude that anything that people have talked about, whether it's climate change, whether it's lack of water in fire hydrants, all of these things we knew about. And our leaders did not do what they could to try to avoid the worst consequences of the fires.
A lot of these leaders are getting blamed. Some people are getting blamed to the point for the fires. What level of blame should be acceptable? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to cut out some of the nonsense and try to be as fair as possible, because I have no interest in casting horrible blame for political gain on certain leaders. I have an interest, and I know a lot of my friends who lost everything, they just want to know what happened so that we can plan so that it never happens again. So let's take some of the things. People made a big to-do about Mayor Bass being out of the country. I don't fault her for that, not at all. Mayors of big cities are ambassadors. They have a duty to be around the world, to have a presence, to go out and make sure that our city is known around the world and people want to do business here. But there are certain things that I do think our leaders at all levels of government could have done better. For example, when the wildfires broke out, for whatever reason, as far as I know, from all of my friends who tried to evacuate, there was no personnel posted along the evacuation routes. So I want to stress that. The firefighters were busy. They were racing to try to put out the fires. Why is it that nobody was there trying to help people evacuate? And I don't want to say nobody, but why is it that in almost every route, there was almost nobody there to help people evacuate? There's a friend of mine that I went to high school with. He was evacuating from the Palisades fire. There's very few roads there. It's no mystery where people are going to have to go. In many of these neighborhoods, there's one way in, one way out. We've seen the pictures on television. We've seen the pictures of people abandoning their cars in the middle of the road because they didn't know what to do. We've seen the images of the people at the old folks home, the nurses pushing people across the street because they didn't know where the evacuation route was. I'll tell you what happened in the Palisades. My friend was driving down the street and he saw that the kids from the local school were evacuating by foot. And they had to evacuate by foot because, everybody comes and drops their kids off in the morning, but they don't have hundreds of cars to take the kids out. So they had to evacuate by foot. And he said that the scene was out of a movie. The kids were holding hands in a big long chain with their teachers, and nobody was letting them pass. There was people panicking to get out of the Palisades fire with their family, with their pets, with their loved ones, and they were not letting the kids cross the street. So
because the cars were driving fast.
Yes, and there was nobody posted on that route, nobody. So my friend had to drive his truck in the middle of the intersection and let the kids pass. People were threatening to kill him. People were throwing stuff at him. People were yelling. And at that point, his decision was, I'm going to delay this line of cars for a couple minutes so that these kids can get out. Nobody should have to do that. I mean, we have tons of personnel in this state, crossing guards even. They could have been rapidly deployed in these fires. By the way, I should tell you, this was 4 hours into the fire, 4 hours. For me, never mind the big headline-grabbing stuff that people are talking about. What about the basics? I want to see the basics done better. I want there to be plans so that, when we have the next fire, and we know we will have the next fire, that we're not hearing about people having to evacuate like this.
What about the fire's causes?
Great question. So I think that's another one that I think it's best to answer with some nuance. The fires have been exacerbated by climate change. And we had a historically horrific wind event this year where we had 100-mile-an-hour winds. But again, I submit that if we all knew about this, we could have taken steps to make sure that we were more fireproof. What could we have done? Well, it's no secret that Southern California has a very, very big population of people who are mentally ill roaming our streets. And when I read that some of these fires were caused by arsonists, that there were people who were so mentally ill that they were going out in our neighborhoods on a day where they knew that fires were already burning. And they were caught with torches, and they were trying to light additional fires. One of the women interviewed, she said, I just like chaos. One of the guys interviewed, he said, I just like the smell of smoke. These are people who need help. And as a society, we need to have the empathy for these people, and we also need to have the wherewithal and the gumption to get them off our streets. They need to be in treatment centers where they belong. They need to be in places where they can get the mental health counseling and the mental health help that they need. But I think that's another aspect of the fires, that when the history is written about these fires, people will look back and say, well, at least for the ones that were caused by arsonists, and it seems that a couple of them were, that those were completely preventable and that our policies could have prevented them.
And what about the brushes and dealing with that? Because there's a lot of fires now coming in areas everywhere around Southern California.
That's another excellent question. So, I gave you my parable about the fishing trip. Let me tell you another one that I think is very easy. Okay, like if you could go back in time to 2018, we just had a horrible wildfire. And I think if you and I were sitting here having a chat just like we're doing now, and somebody said, hey, do you think this will be the last wildfire? None of us would have said yes. We would have said, no, California is going to have a lot of wildfires. And if people had said to us, hey, do you think climate change is going to make them worse? We would have said, yeah, absolutely. And if people had said to us, California has historically had a lot of droughts. Do you think we're going to have another drought at some point? We would have said, yeah, we're going to have another drought. So again, if you knew that wildfires are a thing in California and they're really severe, and if you knew that the climate was changing and that things are going to get even worse, and if you knew that California has historically experienced a lot of droughts and we're going to have another drought, what would you do? What would you do, right? You and I would have common sense. We would go and we would clear some brush. We would make sure that there are fire breaks in densely populated communities. And we would try to make sure that the areas that are most prone to wildfire and most prone to wind events, that there wasn't so much fuel that could burn. And I'll take it a step further. Maybe in the days leading up to a warning from the National Weather Service, because this region had 4 days warning, we would proactively spray fire retardant in some of those areas. It doesn't make sense to just spray the fire retardant once the fire breaks out.
We are honored to be sponsored by Shenyun. I've been attending Shenyun performances every year as they change the choreography and music. Shenyun takes you back in time to the magical world of ancient China with unique blend of brilliant dancing, beautiful costumes, and legends coming to life. Overall, it's a very meaningful performance with a lot more than just entertainment to offer. Make sure to go see it this year. Go to shenyun.com and book your tickets today. I highly recommend it.
People nowadays go to the doctors, the psychiatrists for pills, for antidepressants. This is the antidepressant, the best.
I knew it was going to be good. It's a billion times better than I even thought it would be.
I've heard people say, you don't want to miss this, and I would fully agree.
I'm going to tell everyone to come see it. You have to.
Definitely going to come back next year.
Totally inspirational.
You have to go see this.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime must-see that will change their lives forever.
Mike, some people say, people talk about cleaning up the brush, but is it realistic to do it? Is it possible to do it?
So California is a very big place, and this region is very big. And I always tell my friends on the East Coast how big the city of Los Angeles is compared to, say, Manhattan or San Francisco even. But that being said, this is a state where we have a lot of people who work for government agencies that can clear brush, and we have a lot of volunteers as well. There's a lot of people out there who give their time to various entities who would gladly give their time to protect their community. And I think that, when you look at other regions in the world that have similar fire risk, they do a much better job of clearing brush, or at least clearing fire breaks in the areas that are most prone to wildfires. There are certainly areas that, no citizen can go because it's government-owned land. And a lot of the places where the wildfires broke out was government-owned land. But I think it really just comes down to priorities, right? Our government needs to decide whether it is cheaper to clear the brush beforehand or whether it's cheaper to clean up for the fires afterwards. And I say that a little bit facetiously because I think we all know the answer. It is way cheaper in the long run to clear the brush before such an event than to have to deal with the horrible human suffering and the billions of dollars in damages after the event.
And there's going to be a big environmental impact of all these fires, right?
Precisely. I was reading, look, I love trees. I mean, I really do. I have spent a lot of my life with volunteerism, and I have planted a lot of trees in my life. That's something that I do. That's my thing. But at the same time, when you're talking about the brush in Los Angeles, it's not. By and large, it's not trees. It's coastal chaparral, and in many cases, it's dead already. This is something where, I was reading something where the climate consequences of the fire, we put out more CO2 into the atmosphere than like all the cars in the state of California do in like 2 years, right? And so, again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
A lot of people are frustrated. How do you think it will impact the city? Is there going to be major changes in the city and state?
I hope so. I hope this was an awakening for not only the people in government, but also for the population. Most people, they don't want the government to bother them, right? They just want to go about their daily lives, and they start paying attention to the government when something goes wrong. Well, here, there's a lot that went wrong, and people are paying very close attention. It's very hard to find somebody in Los Angeles who doesn't know somebody affected by the fires, and we've heard their stories, and their stories are awful. I was on the phone with my law partner when his daughter started hyperventilating from the smoke and from the concern. And he had to flee his house in Altadena. He had to go get his elderly parents who live close by. And just seeing what my dear friend and law partner has gone through has just been awful. We were so unprepared, and that region has suffered so much. And now Altadena is facing an existential crisis where people are even doubting whether the sense of community will be rebuilt with the houses.
Do you know a lot of people that were impacted by the fires?
We stopped counting. We know hundreds and hundreds of people affected by these fires. And that's something that people watching from other regions should know as well, that these neighborhoods were small, close-knit places. They were epicenters of thought and leadership in Los Angeles County. Pacific Palisades, it's no secret, that's what most people would consider a privileged community. You have a lot of the business leadership there and a lot of people who've been very successful. Altadena, Pasadena is more of a middle-class community, but it is just such a wonderful place. Altadena is a magical place. You had beautiful views of mountains, just a real, genuine sense of community, and little diners, and just everything that makes life in a neighborhood so special. And I think when a lot of people look back and think about what was lost in these communities, it's not just the structures, it's the sense of a coherent community. Because the people who are facing rebuilding their homes, they've expressed concern to me that it's not just the homes. If you could wave a magic wand and put their house back, and for the people whose homes miraculously did not burn, they don't have a grocery store, they don't have a hardware store, they don't have a place to get a cup of coffee, they don't have a restaurant. The park where they walk their dog is now a charred remain. They don't have a church, a synagogue, a mosque. They have nothing. There's nothing left in these neighborhoods. And so we all have to band together and make sure that these neighborhoods can rebuild and that they can regain the sense of community that they had before the fires.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of red tape in rebuilding?
Unfortunately, I do. I helped a friend who lost his home in the Malibu fire in 2018. He's just now, 5-6 years later.
2018, he lost it.
2018, yeah. He's just now starting to get things back to normal. It took a long time for him to get paid. It should come as no shock to people that the insurance companies move slowly, the court system moves slowly, the government moves slowly. And then, there's going to be shortages of labor. I don't think there'll be shortages of materials, but I think it's going to be very hard to find contractors. And then you start talking about the government bureaucracy. And so, that is something that I really, really hope and pray that our leaders try to do something about, because we can't control the shortage of contractors, but the government bureaucracy, we've got to make sure we cut through it.
In terms of changes in LA, and so people are frustrated, but is that going to lead to a major change in LA? Do you see?
It remains to be seen. The crises can make or break a leader. You look at how popular George Bush and Rudy Giuliani were in the days after 9/11. There was a perception, even among Democrats, that they rose to the occasion, that they did what they needed to do to try to help a grieving nation. If our leaders rise to the occasion, then I think the public will perhaps forgive them for some of the lack of planning. But if we continue to have a sense that there's a whole lot that we could do better, then I think there will be political consequences.
Now, Mike, something I've noticed that politicians don't apologize anymore.
Right.
Why is that?
I don't know, but you ask a really good question. I think after the fires, people were just incredibly upset. And when somebody is upset, there's really only two things you can do on their behalf. You can be sad with them, and you can get mad on their behalf. And I would have liked to see our leaders express a little sense of anger at anything that was done wrong. It doesn't matter if it was within their reporting structure. It doesn't matter if it was their people who did something wrong. They should have expressed the anger on behalf of the population who was angry. And they also should have expressed more sadness. And a very easy way to express that you are sad, and an easy way to express some empathy, is to simply apologize. To simply say, I know how much it must hurt to have lost everything. I am so profoundly sad. To the extent that this was caused by government or exacerbated, or we did not take steps to mitigate it, I'm sorry. And that type of maturity, right? That type of human understanding has been lacking. And I don't understand why, because they teach all of us, when we're very young, that if you do something wrong and you're not even sure if it was your fault, it's just so easy to apologize. If we're walking out today and I accidentally bump into you, and I'm not sure if it's my fault, maybe someone bumped into me, say sorry. Just say sorry. And our relationship would be a lot stronger if we did. And I think the relationship of the elected officials with the population would be a lot stronger if they just said sorry. So many of my friends who lost their houses in the fires are upset about the press conferences. And I know this sounds kind of strange, but for the days after the fires, we would turn on the TV and there would be these press conferences that lasted for an hour. And every single leader insisted on speaking. And in many cases, they would get up and they would take time to spell their name and make sure that the reporters spelled their name correctly. And some of the press conferences verged on the ridiculous. I saw one where they invited the leader of the Humane Society to get up and speak for 15 minutes. Now, I'm not saying I'm a pet guy. I mean, I love my dog, and I would want to know the information of where I could take my dog after a wildfire. But to have people go on and on and on when people just need the basic information, many people have said to me is insulting, especially when the people who need the information most, they don't have TV. They don't have power to watch TV. They don't have internet to watch on their phones. These press conferences seem to veer into the performative rather than the informative. The people who needed the information most were not getting it, and it just appeared to many of my friends that these press conferences were being done to get names in the media. And that, I think, was a mistake. I prefer a press conference where one person speaks, gives all the information in a nice short way, and gets it out to the media so that they can disseminate it better. I think these long press conferences where people go on and on, it sent the wrong message during a time of crisis.
And what about transparency in communication? We are hardly hearing anybody take any blame for anything in these days.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So that's another thing that a lot of people I talk to who are affected by the fires would like to see in the days ahead. The immediate priority, of course, is to take care of their loved ones. And then it is to start the rebuilding process. But there also should be some type of process where the government does an analysis by a third party, by somebody who is not within the governmental structure, to really do a diagnostic as to what went wrong and what went right. There were some things that were done right. We all saw the heroics of the firefighting pilots. They did amazing things. But a lot of people are asking me, as a matter of fact, I've gotten text messages from all over the world of people asking why this region does not have more firefighting aircraft at our disposal. And that's a very, very good question. There were some days where they could not go up because the winds were so strong. But in general, we shouldn't have to be scrambling to beg Canada to send some firefighting aircraft to Los Angeles. We should have our own. We should have a dedicated fleet, and it should be located close by. And clearly, we need to have more of them to fight wildfires like this.
You have friends all over the world, and they've been reaching out to you. How does these fires make LA look like internationally?
We don't look good. We don't look good. I've had people who come from wildfire-prone regions, parts of Australia, parts of Italy, just ask me, like, how is it possible that the fires there always seem like they get out of control? Their answer, they seem to think that their governments do a better job at controlled burns, brush clearance, and what I guess I would call aerial preparedness, having a fleet right on the ready to go, and having sufficient aircraft. But I'll tell you, a lot of people around the world are looking at this and saying that it's also a geopolitical risk. There's a lot of people out there who have expressed the concern that if the United States was, God forbid, ever in a war, or simply if there was a group of people out there, whether they're terrorists or just people who want to do mischief, well, we just hung a big, bright light on a massive Achilles heel in the biggest state in the United States, which is if the conditions are ever dry and if the winds are blowing, we don't seem to have our act together when it comes to stopping something like this. So that is a major problem. It's not just a problem from appearances, right, in the sense that we look bad. It's also a problem if we expose a security flaw. Because if our enemies around the world know that we cannot have an effective wildfire response in the biggest state in the union, that is a major, major security risk going forward.
You grew up in LA, right?
I did, yeah.
You know, LA has a big brand internationally. Yeah. Everybody wants to come to Los Angeles and be in Hollywood or from around the world, and everybody would love to live there. Do you think LA can get revived after these fires?
I hope so, but there are short-term and long-term consequences. We are so dependent on tourist dollars. It's a major engine for our economy. It's not just an engine for Disneyland and for Universal Studios, but also for the guy who owns a restaurant right by Universal Studios. And you know, there's probably a lot of people around the world looking at this and saying, am I going to make Los Angeles my vacation destination this year or next? Probably not. That's going to hurt our economy. We've also been a place traditionally, as you know, that attracts people from all over the world. The best and brightest want to come here, and they want to, you know, strike it out here and try to make their fortune here. You know, will people start to look at this and say, that region is mismanaged, maybe I shouldn't come here? That's what I fear. But I'll tell you, we're already seeing, you know, anecdotally at least, we're seeing some consequences from this fire. I have a friend. He owns a very successful business. It's a medical services business. And he lived in Pacific Palisades, and he lost everything. He was already a little upset at the government here in Los Angeles and California. When I texted him after the fires to say, hey, how are you doing? He said, I moved to Idaho. I'm gone. He wasted no time. He just said, this is too much.
Just
he was
in
very
the last couple of weeks.
He's over it. He just, this was too much. He has young children. He was very, very upset, and I understand. And he made a decision. He has given up on this region. And I think that if I know of people like this, I think there are going to be many, many more.
And what's a way to turn this around? Because obviously we want people to come back to California, this region, to thrive.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people watching that the government belongs to you. And I really mean that. This is the people's government. That's the tradition in this country. The government is supposed to listen to the people. And the more people get involved, the more that they send emails, the more that they tag their leaders on social media, the more that they, you know, express their pleasure or displeasure with how things are going. The more that they vote, the more that they organize people who think the same way that they feel, the more that they support candidates who they think that are good. They can give them $5, they can walk door to door for them. That is the way that we ensure that our government hears the will of the people. People right now, they might be upset. I would encourage them to turn that into activism. You know, if you feel that this is something that where government could do better, express yourself. I know it's not easy. I know a lot of people feel like the government doesn't always listen. But over time, even the biggest rock can be eroded by a drop of water. And I hope that this type of thing happening is something that starts, you know, to totally mix my metaphors, it starts an avalanche of political activism, and it gets a lot of people out there involved.
What does this political activism look like? There's a lot of emotion right now, and there's a lot of hate. How can that be translated to a healthy activism?
Well, when I was in office, I did something that I was told was extraordinary. I answered every email that I got. The Speaker of the California State Assembly told me that my district got the most emails of anyone in the state. And I think the reason is because my voters knew that I would answer them. That if they said to me, hey, Mike, how are you going to vote on this? I would write them back and I'd say, this is how I'm going to vote on it. And they were shocked. A lot of times they were shocked when they got that response. But sending a simple communication to your elected official is powerful. And yes, a lot of them are just going to give you back a canned response. Yeah, a generic response. Thank you for contacting. Yeah. But, you know, at some point, if hundreds of people are writing about the same thing, their staff pays attention. And at some point, if the staff is paying attention, the elected official pays attention. People can also ask for meetings. I know it sounds crazy. People are like, oh, why would that big, powerful elected official talk with me? Well, the answer is because they work for you. That's how it works. And they should take a meeting with you, and at a bare minimum, their staff should. I don't care how busy the person is, that is their job. You know, if someone wrote me and said, you know, hey, I'd like 5 minutes of your time, I would either say, yeah, sure, I'll call you, or come to my district office at such and such date. That is something that I think, again, people should try very hard to do with our leaders. People have some good ideas out there. People have some very, very powerful connections for what we could do better next time. And more importantly, people need to tell their stories. Our leaders need to hear the emotion in people's voices. They need to understand what this meant to people. Some of these stories will break your heart, but our leaders need to hear them. You know, I was talking with a lady the other day, and she had just lost her adult daughter to breast cancer. Her adult daughter was in her 20s, very, very young. And she lost her before she could have children of her own. And it was her only child. This woman lost her home in Altadena. And when she was talking with me, she said, Mike, it's not the financial thing for me. I have no pictures left of my daughter. I have all of my precious memories of my girl are gone. And that just crushed me to hear that. Because it's not about the dollars and cents for most people. It's about their sense of home. It's about the place where they made memories with their children. It's about treasured mementos that have been handed down from generations. And when I hear people talking about the consequences of fires, and I hear people saying, oh, the losses in the Southern California region will be $230 billion. Yeah, they're going to be expensive. But there's also a lot of people like that who lost the memories of their child, who lost things that really cannot be replaced. And that's what I want our elected leaders to hear.
Why are people reaching out to you?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I was in the public eye for quite some time, and I have tried to stay in touch with the people I represented. On top of that, I have tried to be outspoken about some of the things that I think we could have done better with the fires. Our leaders are free to listen. I'm just a guy, you know. I'm just another voter when all is said and done. I'm grateful to have a platform. I'm grateful to have people who follow me on Twitter and places like that. But when all is said and done, I'm just another voter. But I'm a voter who happens to know how the sausage is made. I'm a voter who was the chair of the Utilities Committee 10 years ago. We were looking at these issues then. And to the extent that I have any expertise, I have tried to offer it and tried to make some suggestions. I'll tell you a couple things that bother me. In 2015, I joint authored a bill that would have given firefighters the ability to jam drones just when a wildfire is occurring. It's a very big power, right? You don't want some firefighter to just jam a drone when some hobbyist is flying somewhere. But when there's a catastrophic wildfire, I would argue that they should have that extraordinary power. When the Palisades fires were burning, I turned on the news and I saw that we had 2 super scoopers flying, and one of them was taken out by a drone. We're lucky the pilot didn't die. The drone hit its wing. It was just some hobbyist trying to get pictures. The drone hit the wing of this aircraft. It's grounded. It's grounded for months. And that day, it took out 50% of our super scooper fleet over the Palisades fire. My bill was vetoed. This was 10 years ago. 10 years ago. And when I see things like that, it really bothers me. I authored another bill. This was also about 10 years ago. And this bill would have put in place a complex financing mechanism for communities to put the power poles underground. Why is that important? We've had dozens of wildfires, billions in damage caused by power poles that either blow down in the wind and they spark a wildfire, or they burn down in a fire and then the wires spark other fires. Dozens and dozens of wildfires have been started that way. My bill would have created what I thought was a sensible mechanism. The homeowner would have had to pay for some of it in that subdivision. The city would have had to pay for some of it. The utility would have had to pay for some of it, and the state would have kicked in when all those 3 groups agreed to come together. I thought it was fair, and I thought it would have allowed a lot of these power poles to be put underground. That bill was also vetoed. You know, and then again, we see that it's looking like the fire in Altadena, the Eaton fire, was caused by a power pole. I mean, some of these things fall in the category of when will we learn? Political decisions, governmental decisions have profound consequences. So I'm trying to speak up about this stuff. I've been speaking up for this stuff for 10 years. Because again, I do not profess to have any genius. When all is said and done, I am just an average guy who served in government. But I do think that so many of these issues related to the fires they were predictable. They were knowable, they were addressable, and we did not do everything we could.
There was other funding that got declined in the California state government. It was $1 billion. Do you think this kind of fire prevention, these type of bills are not interesting for the state because it doesn't score political?
Yeah, it's fascinating that you mentioned that because there was a veteran political consultant who said to me, he goes, Mike, nobody pays attention to the plane that lands successfully. And what he means is, in government, if you plan for something well and a crisis does not occur, nobody knows that the crisis didn't occur, right? They just assume that, this is just how things are, and they don't realize that we averted a crazy wildfire, or there was a little wildfire that broke out, but it didn't spread so much. Prevention is not sexy. It doesn't get headlines. If you augment the fire department budget by 10% in a year, that's not going to get you a headline. But these are the things that have to be done. These are like the putting in the work and rolling up your sleeves to determine like what really needs to be done. Do we have the resources needed to make sure that everything is quiet? So that is one of the tragedies with these wildfires is the boring tasks that needed to be done years ago that don't get headlines. Just rolling up your sleeves and doing work. Those just weren't done. Another example of that is the insurance industry. It's been no mystery that the insurance market in California has been awful. And for years, we've needed to take some really bold steps and make some tough decisions to fix our insurance market. Well, I'll tell you something, we didn't fix it. And the insurance market just got a lot worse. People who could not get insurance before, they're going to have a very hard time getting it now. People whose premiums went up by a factor of 10 after the Malibu fires, how are they going to be able to afford insurance after these wildfires? These are things that required rolling up your sleeves and making decisions that were not popular, but they just weren't done.
Do you think something has changed? Because I think 30, 40 years ago, probably things were different, right?
So another guy I know in politics said that the public now cares more about what Kim Kardashian wore to the Oscars than the votes that their elected officials have taken. And I think that's right. I think that's accurate. I think people do not watch politics like they used to. They don't talk about politics like they used to. And frankly, the partisanship in our society has given people a pass. And what I mean by that is if large numbers of the population are saying, this guy's on my team and this gal is not on my team, and my team can do no wrong, and everybody on that side can do nothing right, but I'm happy as long as my guy is fighting that guy. That's not a way to run the government. I mean, we need people to say what I have tried to say, which is, you know what? I love you. I love this official. He's a great guy, and he's a member of my party. And by and large, he's done a really good job, or she's done a really good job. But on this, they screwed up. That's the type of nuance, that's the type of adult discussion we need, and we don't get it. Because we live in a society right now where people just say, I'm never going to criticize my team. I'm never going to criticize them. And as long as my team is out there fighting the other team, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to give that person a pass. That's a recipe for disaster.
How can we get out of this?
So once the fires stop burning, we need to have an honest assessment. The assessment cannot be bureaucratic. The assessment cannot be one of these governmental projects that takes 5 years and they produce a 1,000-page report that nobody reads. We need to have an outside entity come in, probably at every level of government, city, county, and state, to answer a simple question: what could have been done better? And they can do exhaustive research if they want, but their report should be no more than 1 page. And it should be something that's easily digestible, that doesn't pull any punches, and that which offers, frankly, constructive criticism for the government departments that need it. If it only costs $170,000 to put a cover on a reservoir, and you left the reservoir empty for several years, let's prioritize the $170,000, right? I mean, very simple and very clear. This is what went wrong. This is what we have to do to fix it. We should be able to produce that report in 6 months. Do I have faith that that'll happen? No, I don't. I also think that we need to appoint a czar of rebuilding. I know that in Los Angeles, we've appointed something similar to that. But there needs to be somebody. Some people call it, they use the old-fashioned term ombudsman. But it's got to be a central point. Somebody who is going to answer their phone in the middle of the night. Somebody who is going to respond to every email. Somebody who is going to have a team of people who work to unsnarl red tape. And that person needs to go out there to the cameras and say, if you are having a problem with a city agency, if somebody is not giving you their permit within a day or a year or whatever it's going to be, you call me. And they need to give out a phone number that goes to a real person and an email address that goes to a real person. I don't envy that person. That person's probably not going to sleep for many years. But we absolutely need somebody to take the responsibility and somebody to say the buck stops here. If some government bureaucrat is giving you hell after the hell you've been through, I am going to rain hell on that government bureaucrat. That's what we need.
So there's a lot that needs to happen in LA. Like Olympics is coming, World Cup. Do you think these will come, and do you think LA can get its act together to make sure that these fires don't impact?
Right now we're going through a very dark time. For the people who lost homes, they're going to be going through a really tough time for several years from now. But this region has so much good. You look at the volunteer centers that were overflowing with clothes, with toothpaste, with people willing to help for the people who lost everything. I think that it's that spirit that we need to take advantage. That is the spirit that marks Los Angeles. That is the spirit that will enable us to rebuild even stronger than we were. And that's the spirit that I think our government should emulate going forward. We have so many good people here. We are going to come together. We're going to make sure that the people who lost everything, that they regain their sense of community. And we're going to end up, I hope, having a region that ends up stronger than we ever were.
Mike Gatto, former California State Assembly representative, it was great to have you on California
Thank
Insider.
you so much for having me.